Imagine standing before a masterpiece inside Schönbrunn Palace. At first, you see only splendor. Maria Theresa, the most powerful woman in Europe, sits in regal calm. Her 16 children gathered around her like jewels of empire. The brush captures radiance, health, immortality. But wait, look closer. The illusion fractures. One child's face seems too pale, another too thin. And there, among them, Marie Antoinette. Her eyes are not smiling. They are fixed somewhere far away, as if she already hears the echo of a Paris crowd screaming for blood. This is no ordinary family portrait. It is a silent prophecy, a prophecy of death, madness, and betrayal written into the very blood of Europe's most famous dynasty. How could a queen who ruled an empire, who gave birth to 16 heirs, not save her line but doom it? How could a mother's embrace become a chain that dragged her children to foreign thrones, to sickbeds, and to the blade of the guillotine? The Habsburg dynasty believed Maria Theresa would secure its survival. Instead, she scattered her children like chess pieces across Europe. Some would die before their voices deepened. Others would marry into courts that turned against them. The most famous of all would die with her head severed beneath the steel of revolution. Return now to that painting. See how the golden frame glimmers in candlelight. In your mind, watch as the wood begins to crack. A fissure spreads across the canvas, splitting the royal image in two. What once looked eternal now begins to rot. This is the hidden curse of Maria Theresa. And tonight, we will trace how the empire she fought to protect crumbled, not by enemy swords, but by the blood she called her own. Stay with us until the end, and subscribe, because what you are about to witness is only the beginning of history's darkest truths. Maria Theresa was born on a spring day in 1717 in Vienna, inside a palace heavy with incense, ceremony, and the constant murmur of prayers for a son that never came. Her father, Emperor Charles VI, looked upon her tiny face with affection, but also with quiet disappointment. He had hoped for a boy to secure the Habsburg future. Instead, he received a daughter, and with her, the fragile thread on which the dynasty would hang. From her earliest days, her world was not one of dolls or play. It was a world of marble floors and echoing corridors, where every glance and gesture seemed to be measured. She was watched constantly, not as a child discovering her voice, but as the possible savior of a crown. Even before she could walk, courtiers whispered about her destiny. Her father's decree, the pragmatic sanction, declared that she would inherit his lands if no sons came after her. To Maria Theresa, it meant little in childhood, but it shaped the air she breathed. Other girls were taught to sew, to sing, to prepare for marriage. She was taught to hold her head high, to carry herself as if the eyes of Europe were already fixed upon her. One diplomat described her not as a princess, but as a living treaty. That phrase clung to her like a second skin. It meant she could not be only herself. She was Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, the Netherlands. She was not raised as a girl, but as a treaty in human form. Still, she was not without warmth. Those who knew her young spoke of her determination, of a girl who loved music and hunting, who enjoyed riding through the gardens at Schönbrunn with her hair untied. But behind every laugh, every stolen hour of freedom, there was always the reminder that she carried more than her own future. She carried the fate of a dynasty that had ruled Europe for centuries. Her father adored her, Yet even his love was steeped in expectation. When he looked at her, he saw both his child and his legacy. Maria Theresa grew up with the strange burden of being cherished, yet never simply for who she was. Affection came wrapped in responsibility. Pride came tangled with duty. As she matured, the pressures grew heavier. The rituals of court demanded perfection. She must walk with grace, speak with composure, hide her doubts. A misplaced word could ripple outward, becoming fodder for enemies waiting to test her claim. She learned early that nothing in her life was entirely her own. Her body would be a vessel for heirs. Her marriage would be a transaction. Her children, when they came, would be pawns on a board she did not design. Vienna itself seemed to reinforce this destiny. Its gilded rooms glittered with chandeliers. Its chapels rang with hymns. Yet beneath the splendor was an undercurrent of anxiety. Everyone knew the empire rested on a girl's shoulders, from Paris to Berlin. Kings whispered questions. Could she rule? Could a woman command armies, negotiate treaties, and keep together the patchwork of lands that made up the Habsburg realm? Maria Theresa was still young, still clutching her rosary with innocent devotion, when these questions began to follow her like shadows. She prayed with the seriousness of someone who already knew her life would not be her own. In those prayers, she was never only Maria, the daughter of Charles. She was already a queen in waiting, a shield against chaos, the last defense of a fading line. And when the crown finally touched her head, she would discover what all those whispers and expectations truly meant. Not protection, but sacrifice. Not freedom, but the endless weight of duty. The seeds of her tragedy were planted here, in childhood corridors where innocence and obligation became indistinguishable. When Charles VI died in 1740, the fragile hopes of the Habsburg dynasty fell squarely upon Maria Theresa's shoulders. She was only 23, a young woman suddenly thrust into a storm that no preparation could fully anticipate. The crown was hers, by law and by her father's decree. Yet Europe did not honor law when ambition beckoned. Rival powers refused to recognize her claim. Kings and princes circled like vultures, eager to carve apart her inheritance. It was in this moment that Maria Theresa revealed the steel beneath her youth. She was crowned Archduchess of Austria, Queen of Hungary, and Queen of Bohemia. But these were not just titles spoken in solemn halls. They were responsibilities forged in war. Within months of her accession, Frederick II of Prussia, later called Frederick the Great, invaded Silesia, testing the will of a woman he believed could not command an empire. The wars that followed defined her early reign. Maria Theresa stood before the Hungarian Diet, dressed not in fragile silks, but in mourning black. Her infant son held in her arms. With tears in her eyes, yet fire in her voice, she pleaded for the loyalty of her nobles. The assembly erupted with cries of, "We will die for our queen." That moment of raw emotion secured an army, and with it, the survival of her throne. Yet Frederick remained her shadow. Again and again he challenged her armies, stripping Silesia from her grasp, mocking the weakness of her claim. Their rivalry became legend, a duel not just of cannons but of wills, stretching across decades. He was the adversary she could never forget, the enemy whose victories wounded her pride, and whose defiance fueled her resolve. Beside her stood Francis Stephen of Lorraine, later crowned Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. He was her beloved, her partner in life, though not always in politics. Their marriage was filled with devotion and children. But it was Maria Theresa, not Francis, who bore the true weight of governance. He often retreated into financial affairs, while she held court, signed decrees, and commanded armies. She was the true sovereign, a queen who proved to Europe that a woman could rule as fiercely as any man. But every triumph came at a hidden cost. The more she secured her empire, the more she looked to her children as the currency of diplomacy. 16 sons and daughters became her bargaining chips, woven into the fabric of Europe's fragile peace. Each marriage was a contract, each farewell a sacrifice. Her daughters were not sent away as brides, but as ambassadors trapped in golden cages. Her sons were molded into heirs, generals and dukes, rarely free to follow their own desires. In her private heart, she loved them. She prayed for them, wrote letters filled with tenderness and instruction. Yet her role as sovereign meant that love could not stand apart from strategy. Every child became a pawn, every marriage a chain. In her effort to bind Europe together, she unknowingly tied knots that would strangle the very dynasty she sought to preserve. The empire seemed at its height. Her court dazzled with music, art, and ritual. She had secured her claim, held her enemies at bay, and proven the strength of her rule. Foreign envoys left Vienna impressed, even awed, by the power of a queen who had defied the doubts of men. From Schönbrunn to Pressburg, her presence radiated authority. She was Europe's sovereign mother, the embodiment of Habsburg endurance. But behind the glitter, cracks were forming, in Versailles, in Naples, in Tuscany. Her children lived as hostages to politics, their lives no longer their own. Some wilted under the weight of expectation. Others rebelled in silence, their fates spiraling beyond her control. And as her rivalry with Frederick raged on, Maria Theresa could not see that the greatest enemy of her dynasty was not Prussia, nor France, but the fragile bonds she had woven with her own blood. The crown had been defended, the empire secured, yet within the halls of Schönbrunn, the seeds of tragedy had already been sown. They were alive in the lullabies sung to her infants, in the ink of her marriage contracts, in the quiet tears shed when a daughter was sent away forever. The queen who had risen above Europe's doubts was also the mother who had unknowingly prepared the stage for her children's downfall. In the glittering halls of Schönbrunn, weddings were not celebrations of love but orchestrated departures, one by one. Maria Theresa's children were carried away by processions of gold and silk, their futures sealed in the names of treaties rather than the stirrings of their own hearts. 16 children had once filled the palace with noise, but each cradle was never simply a cradle. It was a contract written before the child could speak. The most famous departure came when the young Maria Antonia, barely 14, was dressed in a French gown and sent to Versailles. The journey was long, the farewells short. When the carriage rolled away, Maria Theresa's eyes lingered not on the glitter of the alliance, but on the child waving with hands too small for such a destiny. At Versailles, Marie Antoinette was welcomed with ceremony. Yet behind every bow was a smirk. The French court measured her accent, mocked her manners, and whispered about her foreign blood. Versailles had gained a queen, but she had lost her home. Another daughter, Maria Carolina, was sent to Naples. Her marriage meant to strengthen ties with the Bourbons of Spain. Naples was beautiful, drenched in sun and sea, but it was also a kingdom restless with violence and rebellion. Maria Carolina found herself trapped in a place where daggers hid beneath smiles and loyalty shifted with the tides. The crown she wore was heavy, its jewels sharper than thorns. Maria Amalia, sent to Parma, left Vienna with tears that stained her wedding veil. She did not want the match. She begged her mother to reconsider. But the empire allowed no refusals. Her letters from Parma spoke of bitterness, of a husband she did not love, of loneliness that hollowed her days. Maria Theresa read them, prayed over them, yet could not undo the choice. Her sons too bore the weight of sacrifice. Joseph, her heir, was pressed into a marriage meant to secure Bavaria. Yet the union was joyless, leaving him restless and resentful. Leopold, destined for Tuscany, entered a court filled with factions and intrigue, where every gesture was dissected for hidden meaning. Neither could escape the shadow of duty, for their blood was not their own to command. The palace that had once rung with the laughter of children grew quieter with each departure. Maria Theresa's chambers filled with portraits instead of faces, letters instead of voices. She prayed for her children across distances measured not just in miles but in the coldness of unfamiliar courts. She was both sovereign and mother, and in this role the two identities tore at each other. The queen demanded she send her children away, bind them to crowns across Europe. The mother wanted to hold them longer, to protect them from the cruelty of foreign courts. Yet time and again, the queen won. And so the dynasty appeared stronger than ever, woven into France, Naples, Parma, Tuscany, and beyond. On maps, it looked like triumph. But in the private silence of Schönbrunn, it felt like loss. Every departure drained the palace of warmth. Every union carved away a piece of the family she had tried to protect. In every cradle, there had not been hope, but a silent contract. And now, as those contracts played out across Europe, Maria Theresa could only watch as the price of power was exacted, not in the treaties signed in marble halls, but in the tears of children who had never been free to choose. The Habsburg dynasty had been draped in crowns for centuries, yet beneath the velvet and jewels lay a frail inheritance. Maria Theresa's children carried not only the weight of alliances, but the shadow of their bloodline. Fragile health haunted the family. Sons wasted away before their promise could ripen. Daughters succumbed to fevers that no physician could master. In the nurseries of Schönbrunn, candles were lit too often for funerals instead of birthdays. What had once seemed like abundance slowly revealed itself as fragility. Maria Theresa prayed without ceasing, kneeling for hours, her rosary beads slipping through her fingers until her knuckles ached. Still, sickness persisted. Still, misfortune struck. She could rule armies and negotiate treaties, but she could not shield her children from the curse whispered through Habsburg veins. And then came the most cruel echo of all, Marie Antoinette. Once the bright-eyed girl sent to Versailles, became the embodiment of this legacy. In France, she had never been fully accepted, mocked as the Austrian woman, despised for extravagance she did not entirely control. She became a target when revolution consumed the kingdom. Bread riots turned into fury, palaces into prisons. Her name became a chant on the lips of a crowd that demanded her blood. The image of Versailles laughing at her foreign manners was now replaced by the vision of Paris demanding her life. On that October morning in 1793, Marie Antoinette was led through the streets in a simple white gown. Her hair cut short, her face pale yet unyielding. The cart creaked toward the guillotine as thousands shouted. She ascended the wooden steps, and with each step, the illusion of Habsburg power fell away. When the blade dropped, it was not only the end of a queen, but the most public revelation of the dynasty's curse. far away, in the chambers of Schönbrunn. Maria Theresa had already left the world, but before her death, she had known of her daughter's misery. Letters from France reached her desk, stained with desperation, filled with rumors of jeers and humiliation. She read them by candlelight, her eyes blurred with tears, her trembling hand clutching the rosary tighter as if the beads themselves could hold her family together. The ink smudged under her fingers. The prayers whispered until her voice broke. Power had brought her victories, but each victory seemed purchased by the suffering of her children. The rhythm of her life slowed in those years, her once commanding presence diminished by grief. The queen who had stood against Frederick the Great and stared down armies now sat in silence, the sound of her beads clicking in the stillness. She had defended an empire, but she had bartered away the happiness of those she loved most. The curse was no longer a metaphor. It was flesh and blood, bone and sorrow. It was children buried before their time, daughters trapped in loveless marriages, and a young queen whose head fell beneath the blade in the heart of Paris. Maria Theresa's triumphs echoed through history, but so too did the cries of her children, stretched across Europe like a dirge. And so the world saw the cost of her reign. The power of the Habsburgs survived in treaties and titles, but their blood carried a legacy of suffering. Maria Theresa's rosary remained in her hand until the end, its beads wet with the tears of a mother who discovered too late that crowns, when won through sacrifice, are built on fragile bones. By the late 1770s, the woman who had once ridden at the head of armies and faced down kings was fading. Maria Theresa's body, once upright and commanding, grew swollen with dropsy. Her legs ached, her chest tightened, and each breath came as a shallow gasp. She had spent decades carrying the weight of crowns and children, but now her own body betrayed her, growing heavy, sluggish, and unresponsive. Inside Schönbrunn, the palace that had once glowed with music and the laughter of children, silence reigned. Curtains were drawn against the cold. Fires burned low in the hearths, and the queen remained confined to her chambers. She no longer attended grand audiences or glittering ceremonies. Instead, she sat at a desk scattered with letters, her hand trembling as she tried to answer them. Among these letters were those from France. News of her daughter Marie Antoinette drifted into Vienna like a storm cloud. Whispers of unrest, of mobs in Paris, of venom directed at the foreign-born queen. Maria Theresa's sight blurred as she read, her swollen hands clutching the paper until the ink smeared beneath her touch. She tried to lift her quill, but her fingers shook so violently that the words bled into stains. The empress who had once signed treaties that reshaped Europe now struggled to write a single line to her daughter. Her health declined steadily. Servants spoke in hushed tones of her restless nights, of the pain that bent her once proud frame. Physicians offered little more than ritual remedies, their presence a reminder that even emperors could not escape mortality. Maria Theresa endured, not with grandeur, but with a quiet stubbornness. She clutched her rosary beads, her lips moving in prayer, her breath ragged yet insistent. Those who entered her chamber in those final months saw not the sovereign who had humbled nobles and commanded armies, but a mother bowed by grief. She had watched too many children leave her side, too many alliances turn into sorrows, and now she bore the torment of knowing that her youngest daughter in Versailles was already drowning in a tide of hatred she could not stop. On November 29, 1780, the silence of Schönbrunn deepened. The air was heavy, the candle flames flickered, and Maria Theresa, seated in her chair with papers scattered before her, allowed her pen to slip from her grasp. It struck the desk with a sound small yet final, the sound not of triumph, but of surrender. She died at the age of 63, her body worn by illness, her spirit exhausted by decades of sacrifice. There were no thunderous speeches, no defiant last words for history to record. Only the image of a woman who had once held together an empire now departing in stillness. The trappings of monarchy surrounded her, yet the room felt bare, stripped of all but the faint scent of ink and the cold touch of stone walls. The empress who had outwitted kings and ruled vast lands left the world not as a conqueror, but as a mother grieving children she could not save. Her reign had been long, her victories many, but her final hours spoke more of fragility than power. And when her body was carried from Schönbrunn to rest among the Habsburgs, the echo that lingered was not the grandeur of her empire, but the quiet fall of a pen, the faint murmur of prayers unfinished, and the unshakable truth that no crown can shield a heart from sorrow. History remembers Maria Theresa as a queen of immense power, a ruler who held together one of Europe's greatest empires. She was celebrated as the sovereign mother of nations, the woman who turned doubt into triumph. Yet beneath the golden portrait of her reign lies a darker image. She was also the architect of a curse, a queen who locked her dynasty into chains written not in law, but in blood. Picture a vast map of Europe in the 18th century. Red pins mark the places where her children were sent: Paris, Naples, Parma, Tuscany, Vienna. At first, the pins shine like victories, proof that the Habsburg bloodline extended across courts and kingdoms. But then, one by one, those pins begin to fall. Paris crumbles in revolution. Naples drowns in violence. Parma festers in misery. And Versailles becomes a stage for the guillotine. The map empties. What once seemed like triumph collapses into tragedy. This is the enduring paradox of Maria Theresa. She was both savior and destroyer, mother and monarch, a queen whose strength preserved her empire, yet whose choices bound her children to lives of sorrow. Her legacy gleams with authority, but it bleeds with sacrifice. And in that contradiction lies the essence of her story: power that endures on paper, but decays in flesh and bone. We remember her not only for the victories she carved, but for the warnings she left behind. Thrones are not destroyed only by invaders at the gates. Sometimes they rot from within, corroded by ambition, sacrifice, and the silent curses passed from cradle to coffin. The guillotine that silenced Marie Antoinette was not only the end of a daughter, it was the echo of a curse that began in Schönbrunn, where lullabies were sung as contracts, and where every child was marked by destiny before they could speak. And now the question lingers: if Maria Theresa, with all her strength and vision, could doom her dynasty through the very blood she spread across Europe, how many other crowns hide the same decay? How many portraits of power conceal fractures waiting to split wide open? If you want to uncover the darkest truths behind the thrones of history, do not look away. Stay with us. Like this video, share it with others who dare to face the shadows of the past, and subscribe to this channel, because this story is only one among many, and the next may be even darker.